Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing the second DLC pack released for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, entitled The Champion's Ballad. So Nintendo, when they first announced that Breath of the Wild would be having DLC, they said that there would be two main packs, not counting the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 deal that I kind of feel was tacked on last minute. The first was entitled Master Trials, and I already reviewed it this summer of 2017 to be precise if you're watching this later. And overall, my thoughts on it were the collectibles were kind of cool. Hadn't tried out the Master Mode at the time. Have since then, and it was decent, but not nearly as brutal as, like, say, the Hero Mode in A Link Between Worlds. And the Trial of the Sword, I found, was fun to do and even more fun to complete, but the reward was severely lacking. Champion's Ballad promised not only to bring us an additional dungeon and new challenges, whatever that meant, but also a new story. The details of that story were kept relatively vague, and while Nintendo certainly lived up to creating an experience that even after beating the Trial of the Sword, I still had plenty of challenging moments, they didn't quite live up to the expectations in the story department. Allow me to elaborate. So, one of the most noticeable things about Champion's Ballad is that you get a plethora of notifications on your screen about new side quests that have opened up, just like in Master Trials, where you can scour the land of Hyrule to find more sets of armor that give you various bonuses if you wear the whole set. Admittedly, the rewards that you get for getting the armor are not so much as good as the actual armor itself. Like, for example, when you get Xant's helmet, the game says that you're unfreezable, but yet I still had to wear warm clothes when I was in the snowy mountains, and that seems kind of a contradiction. Alas, they're good Zelda fan service, but nothing compares to the new horse gear. Now, I was only able to get the ancient saddle. There's also an ancient bridle, which is the only new item that I wasn't able to get out of the bunch. But the ancient saddle was worth it alone because it lets you whistle for your horse anywhere. Like, you can be in the middle of nowhere, whistle for the horse, and the horse just swirls right in front of you. Which is kind of like a nice imitation of the horse call from Twilight Princess or Epona's song in the N64 Zelda games. Except now it's magic instead of Epona running toward you. Which, again, is cool, but seeing as Breath of the Wild puts very little emphasis on horses to begin with, it quickly wears off when you realize that the game doesn't really allow for horseback riding as much as it does gliding and climbing mountains. However, we have yet to get to the real meat of the challenge, and that is in the Champion's Ballad side quest. Weird how you'd think the name of the DLC pack is the Champion's Ballad, yet they'd have a Champion's Ballad side quest within a Champion's Ballad pack. Am I missing something here? Anyway, after you've completed all of the main dungeons, you're asked to return to the Shrine of Resurrection and put the Sheikah Slate back into the pedestal where you first found it. Doing so will give you a weapon called the One-Hit Obliterator, which, as the name implies, lets you defeat any enemy in one hit, but at the cost of your health is permanently drained to a quarter of a heart, and you can't disequip the weapon unless you want to completely abandon the next trial. You can't use another weapon, and you can't binge on all that extra food you stockpiled from the amiibos. I tried. It didn't work. It just drained my hearts. Would have been nice if the game had actually warned me that I'd lose my food before I ate it, but oh well, I guess that's what I get for not reading the description thoroughly enough. Anyway, you're then asked to take this almighty weapon, go into the Great Plateau, and seek out camps of enemies and try to defeat them all. And this really puts a new spin on the Zelda formula because the atmosphere gets all creepy and the music starts turning to the tune that played when you're in the Lost Woods. And it really felt like I was playing through another Silent Realm from The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, which, as I said in my review, were some of my favorite parts of the entire game. Because that also had an eerie, suspenseful feel where if you got hit even once, you died. And this also goes for falling, freezing to death, drowning, etc. So you really got to be on your guard and really be aware of the enemy's patterns, how to fight, when to use your obliterator, because it has to recharge for every 2 times it kills an enemy, so you can't just completely abuse it. You also have to think about, maybe I should use my runes here, maybe I should use arrows, maybe I should try to use the environment to my advantage. Ultimately, the limited amount of freedom that you had at the beginning of the game is still present here. But if that wasn't enough, every time you defeat a group of enemies, a brand new stinking shrine pops out of the ground and offers you yet another mind-bending puzzle. And boy, did Nintendo not disappoint. You'd think with 125 shrines in the main game alone, Nintendo would have run out of ideas. But no. These are actually some of the best shrines I have played in the Breath of the Wild experience. Admittedly, they are very brutal and don't pull any punches. In fact, with the exception of one, you also still have that one hit and you die mentality. But they really push your brain to think even more outside the box than you were already doing, and yet still have enough room for experimentation that makes Breath of the Wild such an amazingly replayable game. Possibly the most replayable game in adventuring history. After that's all said and done, then the one-hit obliterator explodes and sort of does a swirl into the air like the goddesses in Ocarina of Time, and then monuments appear across the land, and you can seek out the monuments in whatever order you want. And so each monument will give you a picture of where your next challenge is going to be, and you're promised that if you complete all of those challenges, you'll get to face an additional boss and get to learn more about each champion's backstory a bit more. These were initially frustrating because they just gave you a very vague image on a map, and so if you didn't have your map 100% completed, you're pretty much screwed. Thankfully, they're all in the general vicinity of the area that you're in. For example, if you're at the one near the water dungeon, you're of course going to want to look in the water region, etc. But it really tests how much you know your geography of Hyrule. Because just like with finding the hidden items in the Master Trials and Champions Ballad, you have to think, okay, how does this patch of land match up with the description? The challenges themselves are really, really fun, like sand surfing to get through rings, swimming up waterfalls. I don't want to name all of them because half the fun is actually discovering where and what you have to do. But thankfully there's usually a visual cue in the distance, as well as you have the ability to talk to the up-and-coming champion as well as the chief of the nearby village to get at least a little bit of clues. Admittedly, I wish some of the clues were a bit more clear, but they're not impossible, as only one of them did I actually have to look up. The other one, I guess I technically looked up too, but the other one was I was on the right track, but with my dyslexia semi-hybrid thing, I accidentally didn't read the S at the end of foes and misread it as foe, and that's what got me confused. But once I figured that out, I was like, oh, cool, I was in the right place all along. So after you do each of those respective challenges, another shrine pops up. So that amounts to 16 shrines throughout the entirety of this new DLC. And like the ones in the Great Plateau, these shrines, again, are incredible tests of everything you've learned in Breath of the Wild so far, geniusly designed, and unlike the ones in the Great Plateau, you can actually take a couple of hits for these, so that is very nice. However, once you actually beat the shrines, that's when things start going a little bit downhill, because then you're asked to head back to the dungeon, and then you get to refight the boss of that dungeon, but with very limited inventory, with the music blurry and the visuals slightly distorted. This is a huge letdown, but not a terrible one, because I had a lot of fun trying to rethink how would I be able to re-defeat this boss, not bringing in my own arsenal of stuff, and using a preset array of weapons, armor, arrows, etc. It helped me to get back into the spirit of micromanaging that I've since lost since replaying Breath of the Wild, now that I have way too many amiibo to count. And it made some of the easier bosses that I breezed through more of a challenge because of that added re-emphasis on stockpiling and really knowing how to use what's given to you. Then you're given a little cutscene about a hidden tidbit of the champion that you didn't know before. These were kind of cool, and I'm one of the few people that actually liked the voice acting in Breath of the Wild, so it was nice to hear more of an opportunity to hear them speak, but that's hardly the original story that it seemed like we were going to get. Here I thought we were going to get some closure, we were going to get some answers, the loose ends would be tied up, but no, just more backstory. Boring. But that's not a total downer, because once you defeat all of the new shrines and all of the extra bosses, then you're told to go back to the Shrine of Resurrection, and then you get to unlock a brand new stinking dungeon, which was amazing. And the epic music was so show-stopping. It was almost as if Nintendo was saying, Wii U, it's time for you to go. And boy, do you get to go with a bang. Almost as if you're marching up to your final hours, ready to live up to the hype that the critics have long denied you. And it does. Admittedly, the dungeon is rather small by Zelda standards, but then again, so were all of the main dungeons in Breath of the Wild. This one is particularly unique because it has some brand new mechanics that you wouldn't exactly have expected from the main game, and really just expects you to really know how the game works. How does the physics work? How far can your runes reach? Stuff like that. You really got to be on top of your game. And then on top of that, you get a brand new boss that actually isn't recycled. Admittedly, stupid easy if you have the right equipment. And then you get... You really think I'm going to spoil what you get after you defeat all that? Suffice to say that throughout your ordeals, you also get to power up your champion powers so that they take less time to recharge. You can basically use them more. And you also get a new cutscene at the end. Well, two if you count the one that has a brand new voice actress, which I'm not going to spoil. But it left me wondering, wait, that's it? Where's the story? Where am I not going to be able to do a Catholic review for this game? Where are the undertones? Where's the closure? Ultimately, that's the most disappointing part of the Champions Ballad, is it just did not deliver on the original story. Nintendo should have marketed it as, say, more info on Champions, and left it at that. If you're gonna tease an original story, Nintendo, make it like 999, where they teased an entire 2 separate games to make the story be better. This just felt like laziness. But thankfully, if you're not a story buff like my brother, then you'll find the Champions Ballad to be immensely enjoyable, especially if you're kind of like, oh man, 125 shrines, that's it? When am I going to get more? Oh, you get more, and they're amazing. New gear is pretty cool, and the reward for completing all of this is satisfying, but not as satisfying as I would have liked. For instance, if you're going to make all this build-up after every time I defeat a challenge to say, now you have more power than ever to defeat Calamity Ganon, why am I not fighting Calamity Ganon? Yeah, that's right. The final boss that you encounter is not Calamity Ganon, nor anything even remotely resembling him. In fact, I've heard that if you go back to the Calamity Ganon battle, it hasn't changed a bit. But Champions Ballad was still worth playing because it felt like it was an amalgamation of what the Wii U basically was. It was a system with a lot of potential but missed opportunities. It had some truly great moments, which are more reminiscent of the new shrines and the new brain-busting puzzles that you get. But then on the flip side, it just didn't deliver on the epic story that it promised, just like there were certain franchises that were left in the dust by the Wii U. And with that, I think I'm finally ready to say it. The Wii U is dead. Now that I've beaten the Champions Ballad, I just have a couple of old games that I never got around to, and then that's it. Now we're on to the Switch era. And yes, I am going to get a Switch eventually. After I heard the announcement of 3 new Ace Attorneys, I am most certainly getting one, probably right after Christmas or early 2018. I'm still not going to give up on reviewing Wii U games, as there are still quite a few gems that I missed out on because of the insanely awful price at the time. But now that they're going down, I might be reviewing more stuff. Although, trust me, Switch and SNES reviews are definitely going to be a big priority of mine the coming months in my reviews. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I hope you really enjoyed all that Breath of the Wild had to offer. I think that this DLC would be even more helpful if you got Breath of the Wild before the DLC came out, and then had the DLC as an added bonus to lengthen your adventure more or make the final battle easier. And then stay tuned for a ton of RIP Wii U videos coming up to celebrate the Nintendo Underdog's greatest and least greatest moments. So with that, hope you all have a Merry Christmas. So, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.